This is the Blueprint Podcast, bringing you the latest in cyber defense and security operations from top blue team leaders. Blueprint is brought to you by the SANS Institute and is hosted by SANS Senior Instructor John Hubbard. And now, here's your host, John Hubbard.
Coming up on this episode of Blueprint, if you're someone looking to get into cybersecurity, already in InfoSec and looking to stay current, or an organization looking to hire new cybersecurity positions or upskill your current employees, this episode is for you. Stick around for a discussion all about building and measuring cybersecurity skills with guest Rob Lee on this episode of Blueprint. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special episode of Blueprint, where we've got none other than Rob Lee, a guy who's been around SANS for a long time as an author, as a DFIR curriculum instructor, and now Chief Curriculum Director for the whole of the SANS Institute. Today, we're here to cover one of the things I think Rob probably in an outstanding position to be an expert on at this point, and that is cyber reskilling. Something that a lot of organizations are looking to do, a lot of people are looking to do on a personal level, and as threats continue to grow and we continue to see more and more damage over the year, this is something that's only going to grow in relevance. So, Rob, first off, welcome to the podcast. And for those who might not know you, let's hear a little bit about your background and your current position.
Hey, thanks, John. First of all, I'm really excited to be here on the Blueprint. You've really put together an amazing show, and the interviews you've done over the past couple of years have just been top notch. I really feel flattered to finally make the cut. A little bit about my background. I feel like I've been doing this, for a long freaking time. Since 96, I was in the Air Force, worked in one of the first intrusion detection squadrons, now defunct 609th Information Warfare Squadron, but maybe arguably be the first information operations cyber unit that was deployed by a military. I had no idea what I was doing. It was one of those that, the SANS Institute really wasn't in, existence at that point. So you really had to, self-train almost in everything. The practical Unix and Internet Security Guide, that book, I think everyone had at that time frame, was the only thing in existence. And we were using, at the time, was NetRanger product to do intrusion detection. Quickly moved from there and started working with the Air Force also special investigations, doing national level computer intrusion investigations, going back to even our cyber threat intelligence course here at SANS, it makes mention of it. Moonlight Maze was one of the first instances of nation state attackers that kind of cropped up back in 1998. And kind of the ball just kept rolling from that point that, I never thought I'd be making a career out of cybersecurity. But background includes being a SOC analyst, doing intrusion investigations, digital forensics work. I worked in offensive operations, Title 10, Title 50 for the U.S. government, did vulnerability research, non-public exploit development, went back to Mandiant, did incident response, did management there, got my MBA, started my own company. And all along, I also worked at the SANS Institute developing what eventually became their forensics curriculum, initially based on their first course that we had at SANS, Track 8, which became 508. And then slowly just, things took off from there. I think like you, I am very fortunate to be doing what I love on a daily basis. I love what's going on, seeing what's going on in the world with cybersecurity in terms of, the level of, people really saying how important it is at this point. Whereas, not even 10, 15 years ago was like almost an afterthought. I was like, yeah, we kind of need it. But today, most organizations, are really taking this seriously. And it's become something that, for a lot of us in the field, started way back then. Something that, there's so many different niche areas to be in. It's, the fact I've experienced in multiple fields is rather unique. I don't think we're going to see many people kind of follow that same path where you kind of like jump in across the board. You'd probably, be more niche almost immediately in a lot of your, hey, I'm a blue team person, but, maybe you get into the hacker exploits, but, you typically red teamer, you love the red team stuff. If you like the cloud, and so forth, that the skill sets needed for one discipline are so immense that, you have some basics that are covered, but, something you really have to think about is, a lot of people are just entering the field.
Yeah, I have to imagine way more just subspecialties now than there ever have been in this. So talking reskilling, right, that can come in a number of forms, and we'll get to that when we get there. But to kind of kick off this conversation, what brings you to kind of be interested in the reskilling topic, and what are you seeing in terms of like the state of the industry and the need for reskilling right about now?
Well, nothing, that's a great question. The thing that changed, and it has changed rather significantly over the past 3 years, was the onset of COVID. And to a great extent, it forced a lot of organizations to transition more quickly and rapidly into diversification of capabilities in their own workforce, in addition to what they need for their enterprises to succeed. Prior to COVID, it was pretty typical that you'd house your own IT resources in a building, in a co-location, maybe in the basement. That is, but again, once the remote workforce really happened, you ended up moving a lot of that infrastructure into the cloud over the past 2 years, where, how are we going to get access to, basic services, Zoom as a software as a service. Most people will be using their own personal PCs or even a work PC, not even, connecting to a work environment. So what's the perimeter at this point? What are you defending? What are you looking at? And, the attack surface has blown up as a result of this, because what we were used to, defense of the island and be able to monitor and get, regular traffic patterns has really shifted. You really had to think about host protection, cloud-based protection. How do we do forensics and its response on these, basically services, like O365, where most organizations have transitioned over into hosting their own exchange to hosting it in the cloud. Not only because it's cheaper, it's more efficient, for a lot of organizations. But what does that mean, for cybersecurity as a whole? So there's this technological change that occurred that has basically been moving behind the scenes, as a lot of people have been looking at this from their own skill sets.
Yeah. So with that as a background, what does reskilling mean to you? Is that something of getting deeper into the stuff that's changed, or is that moving careers, a little bit of all the above? What is the under the umbrella of reskilling in your mind?
Well, I don't even know, you asked earlier before we started, is reskilling the right word? I don't know. I'm just kind of using it right now, almost making the analogy that I think cybersecurity is about to undergo a transition, not much different than the transition from typewriters to word processors. Is that the reskilling that will need to have happen is you need a retraining and reskilling of a lot of your workforce. Either A, you're faced with hey, maybe we should hire the young new kid who may have these skills, or B, I have to go take someone who's been with my company well, knows the company well, and I need to give them additional skills in order for them to be able to complete their jobs. So where this initially came up, and I remember, and I'll just talk about even in SANS a little bit, is that cloud, for example, we have a cloud curriculum, and we were looking for more cloud instructors. I said, well, we have 150 instructors at SANS. I said, I wonder how many of them have, deep knowledge cloud experience. And, I was looking at that, and what we found is that, we obviously have a lot, but, it's far, from everyone knows TCP IP, it's like, that's almost like a core fundamental skill. You had to do that. But today, will you need to know those fundamental skills, or is it more the fundamentals are changing? Do you need to understand cloud infrastructure a lot sooner and have that as the base? And how do you get that exposure if you've been working in the field for 15 years? Do you need to go back and say, okay, I need cloud basics, and admit, hey, I'm a master of this, and do I need to go back to a basic course just to reintroduce myself to the new laws of physics? It's almost like retraining new medical techniques that come forward. It's like 20 years as a doctor. Sooner or later, you need to go back to training in how to do, the current surgery techniques, and, potentially practice on that, and be able to, have the confidence that your patients are going to look to you and say, yeah, okay, the old doctor is able to still do the new operations. So that's where that thinking came from, and was mostly through discussions with SANS instructors. I started thinking, oh, maybe we need, as a whole, and I, not just in SANS, but outside, I start talking to other organizations that there's a real fear that a lot of their current workforce, what core skills do they now need? And, can you go to someone who's been in the field for 15 years or plus saying, hey, we need you to go take a cloud essentials course? And they're like, well, I could pick up a book, maybe they're kind of like, you and I, when we first started. But maybe it's the easiest path is to say, hey, listen, we're going to, put you back into a basic program just to bring you up. And then are there multiple sub niches inside cloud, even at this point, that we're looking at. What is the perimeter now? What is a SOC monitoring? How is it shifted from network to host-based and to cloud-based and software as a service? These are some of the things, like the entire restructure of operations may change too. And I think a lot of that's going to come out specifically from a retraining effort where we have a lot of people saying, hey, the thing we used to do, we now need to do this new thing because you now have the skill sets to be able to do that.
Yeah, undoubtedly, it's a change game when we have gone from not really anything in the cloud to now everything is in the cloud, and we have these multiple levels of abstraction, and we have different architectures. We got zero trust we're trying to turn things into, and SASE, whatever kind of architectures, and just very different stuff than what we had before. There's, I think, more things to learn and different levels of abstraction to learn that on. Whereas before, like you said, it might be TCP/IP basics and core fundamentals there. Now we might be diving into serverless architecture. How do we defend that? Right, that wasn't a thing a couple of years ago, and so just all of these things definitely, in my mind, lead up to we need a lot of new skills and to keep people current with all of those. If you look at some of the surveys that are out there, the IC Squared has one, the Global Information Security Workforce Study they put out every year is one to check out. And they're always saying millions of IT security workers are needed, worldwide.
Yeah.
And 50% of teams are hiring, and, they have a nice breakdown of what skills people are needed on. And it's all cybersecurity, related stuff, but it's those technical skills and cloud skills and everything else. It's an interesting spot to be in, and clearly a growing one. Way I wanted to break this down is the kind of a couple different facets to this question, reskilling, right? There's reskilling from I'm already working in security and I want to continue to work in security and keep myself current. And maybe we start there, but the other two kind of things I wanted to cover after that are I'm not in security and I want to get into security. And then from the organizational perspective, what do I do as an organization that wants to bring people in that are maybe already employees and reskill them to be a cybersecurity practitioner? So,
right.
Starting with the first one, right? Keeping yourself current as someone that's out there. How does someone know where do you get the training? What can you advise people who are maybe already in the field to do to look at, am I current? What can I learn? And where can I go to learn that stuff?
Well, it's the same question I would ask you. It's what scares you? What would keep you up at night saying, man, I hope I don't get called about on this tomorrow? Or, you're teaching a class, as if someone asks this question, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be able to answer it. But it actually comes down in two sides of that. It's a technological awareness of the new platforms that exist. But it's also the second side of that is aware of attacker techniques that are currently in use and being practiced. From an example of, how's ransomware actually being accomplished today? The different groups out there moving inside the organizations. Is it just strictly through email? Is it through exposed, services? How much of that is actually at risk? And what do you do to mitigate that? Even being held for huge sums of money, and just that alone, what are the different attack groups doing and how are they potentially penetrating in the organizations? And that's where I always recommend, offensive courses that are really being kept up to date. You have to look for, is cloud involved? Is, from these services, service attack side, and then the technology base of that. So both of those combined into a single, which one of these is going to be more useful to you for being able to keep up with the trends? So ransomware is a really good example. Is that stuff does keep a lot of organizations, square. But how many organizations really feel that they are able to respond well to a ransomware attack? Have you tabletopped it? Have you worked through all the different features? Would you pay the ransom? And then do you have the confidence in your team that if you don't pay the ransom, you're still going to be able to recover? Your traditional skills may not cover those, and that's where you follow through with a gap analysis a little bit. And from a personal one, saying I don't know what I would do if all of a sudden the ransomware hit this particular type of system. And it's one of the reasons why you take a look at Linux security, Unix security, whereas, there's this trend, it was everyone had to know it in the early 90s and mid 90s, and, kind of trailed off into the early 2000s where Windows and Windows Enterprise networks became the, primary dominant form of enterprise technologies. But guess what's now making a comeback? Well, Linux and Unix. Why? Well, it's because of so many of the infrastructure-based cloud systems are all based off of Unix and Linux. Obviously platform being free and so forth, but you have a lot of people who haven't seen that before. And so there's like, what do I do to secure it? What do I do to make sure my data is in the right locations? What are the vulnerabilities? What about the web servers? All the things, you end up running into this, what is old is new again. And, do you have a Linux class to, go to be able to not only how do you defend these systems in the cloud, but how do you potentially respond to them as well with this different technology base that you're not used to?
Yeah, it's funny. Two of the things you mentioned there, two things I hit every single time I teach, no matter what it is, right? Class-wise, I always wrench in like the fact that learning offense as a defender is really important. And I speak from, my experience as a SANS student originally, right? I took 560 with Ed Scotus way back in, I don't know when it was, 2014, I think it was. And came back from that class like, wow, I'm going to defend very differently now because I know what's possible from an attacker perspective. And you can, play your whole, career in the defensive pool. But if you don't kind of flip sides at least once and see and look over an attacker's shoulder or take a class on it, I think there's a lot that you might miss. So that's super important. The other thing, techniques for ransomware and stuff like that, that's another thing. I actually just doubled down on that kind of content in some of the classes, pointing out things like when the Conti playbook leaked back, I think it was last December.
Yeah.
That's like a beautiful thing to say, like, here is literally what your attackers are typing. So if any of the listeners haven't seen that, just search Conti playbook leak and you'll find it. But it was all the files, it was all the commands, it was how they do it, TTPs galore. And as a defender, I always emphasize, like, that's the kind of thing you have to pay a lot of attention to, because if you don't know what you're seeing in there, it's going to hit you and you're not going to know it until it's too late. So yeah.
And it's tied to, just basic understanding and absorption of cyber threat intelligence. If you know what attack groups are potentially interested in, you could use that to help focus the techniques and TTPs that you particularly may be running into. And you could, even focus your, tabletop exercises based on those scenarios, which, again, it doesn't take much to do a tabletop exercise just to see how people react. And provides invaluable gap analysis. But even you could just tabletop with your own team. If you're a tech leader, which is 3 or 4 people, you'd be able to say, okay, let's assume we get hit with ransomware. Who does what? Let's walk through this, and you'll find pretty quickly, various opinions on what they're supposed to do. Because unless you're hit with it daily, you want to have those discussions early on. But then you realize you don't have the skill. What happens if it hit the server in the AWS or Azure environment? Do we even have access to? Do we even know who to call over there? It's fascinating.
Yeah, those things can be really, really fun to do, right? In terms of tabletops, and then also very enlightening. Whether it's tabletop or purple team test or whatever, right? Trying it out, practice makes perfect. Train like you fight kind of mentality there. That's all stuff that works great for people who are in the industry, understand those things, and I think that's solid advice for anyone looking to do that kind of thing. What if you are not yet in cybersecurity and you are in whatever position you happen to be in and are looking towards it as like, oh, I want to make the jump?
Right.
What do you have as advice for them? That's a very broad question.
This could be its own episode because I'm actually very opinionated about this. So first of all, get in the field. There's zero wrong you're going to do for yourself. If you have an affinity toward computers and want a stable and yet fulfilling long-term career, then cybersecurity is something to really take advantage of. The second thing is, to really take a look at, it's like, how do I get the prerequisite skills? And what do I need to do? And I would say initially there's a lot of, the technology-based courses that you could take, A+ certification. SANS has a security foundations. I'm not, trying to sell that. It's more of a take what you can. But then the next question I usually get, John, is should I go get a degree in this? And this is really a weird question because there's this, should I go get a comp sci degree? Should I get a cybersecurity degree? Do I need a degree? And you're not going to hurt yourself with to be honest, with, going and getting a degree. The question is, if you had to say, what is the shortest path between A and B? I'm interested in cybersecurity. How do I get my first job? Is like, 2 to 3 training classes could honestly get you there. And then maybe look to a degree program that is potentially tied to those that you might be able to eventually get to, because, long-term promotions, people like to see the degrees, still the society we live in, but do you need to go get that 4-year education? The question is maybe not. It really depends on what your life goals are. But I always get the question, it's like, I just want to get in the field. I have a bachelor's degree, was in humanities or whatever. Not saying that's bad, but more of it, I want to go technical after my non-technical degree. What do I do? I don't want to have to go to another 4-year program. And that's why I said, there are a lot of, very core entry-level programs that are out there that unless you get employed and you're just lucky to be able to go through it. The other side is military, if it's an option, go on the cybersecurity track. I guarantee you they're going to give you a plethora of training. And training and experience pretty damn quickly. But overall, it ties into that. Honestly, most employers what the problem is on hiring these people, because they end up having the requisite skills. I'm hiring someone entry level, 3 years experience, bachelor's degree in computer science, and 8 years experience in Kubernetes. Like that's the ongoing joke, but they overshoot from an HR perspective instead of saying, we will take you and train you, come work with us. And I actually am trying to advise a lot of employers to take this approach, saying, if you sign up with us, we will get you the training. We need entry-level SOC analysts, and we will train you to this job. It'll take 6 months, but we're going to invest into you. And maybe there's a payback period, or something like that the military does. I mean, there's different ways to approach it, but there's this aspect of I'm telling employers, take the risk with zero experience and promise the training, and then you're going to get so many applications. You choose the best people for these, and you create an environment that has a rapid upward advancement out of those entry-level positions. And you continually do this. If you shoot too high, you're going to no applicants, because someone's going to take an entry-level job with 3 years experience. They're already at another level. But if you say we're going to train you, then you have your choice of 100 resumes. You choose the best one. And you might find a couple comp sci degrees in there. It's like, hey, look, I found a comp sci degree. And, passion, willingness to learn, and, those two things, in addition to, I really want to be in this field. You measure someone on those 3 aspects. You choose the best of the resumes, train them yourselves. And that's what I'm trying to get the organizations to do. So it's an organizational problem, which ties into, I think, your third question. But, for someone who right now is like looking to get in the field, is like, try to take any class that's out there. But if you're an organization who wants to take a risk with the zero experience, we'll train you, send me, a tweet or something like that. I will gladly say, here's another organization willing to hire with zero skills. Send your resumes in. They're hiring 10 people a month. I mean, you could imagine, it's like, and then that HR group, all you have to do is choose the best. Yeah. It's like the best internship program you potentially ever want, but again, you have to pay them, but, pay to train is a way to look at it. And I think a lot of organizations are just so scared of it that I'm looking at it from an aspect of invest in that early stage. It'll pay off. It's because that loyalty may get them to stay with you for a long time.
Hey, cybersecurity leaders and SOC managers. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know about SANS Management 551, Building and Leading Security Operations Centers. It's a course made for anyone looking to build, improve, or be their most effective in leading a security operations team. But what I wanted to say was, since the release of Season 2 of Blueprint, we've had some exciting updates that I wanted to let you all know about. I'll start off by saying this. If there's one thing I've been surprised by this year, it's how quickly the new 5-day version of 551 has taken off with security ops team leaders around the world. We've seen continued rapid growth and interest in the course, no doubt given to probably the high rate of enormous damaging cyber attacks that have been happening over the last couple years. What you might not have heard is the good news that due to the popularity, GIAC immediately jumped on building a brand new security operations leadership certification to go with the course. So now, if you take Management 551, not only will you get 5 days of the standard SANS level of intense hands-on training with exercises, perhaps with Mark Orlando or myself as your instructor, but also a unique chance to be one of the first people in the whole world with the GIAC GSOM certification for security operations management. I'll tell you, this class is really, really fun. If you join us online or for one of our live classes, you're going to be taking the class with a peer group of security operations leaders from organizations all over the world and working with them on labs, facilitated discussions, and on our Cyber 42 exercise, which we run at the end of every day of the course. So this is a highly interactive and social course where you learn not just from the instructors, but also build your network of other security leaders who you can discuss your specific problems with and pick up best practices from as well. How cool is that? If you aren't sure if the course is for you, head on over to sans.org/MGT551, where you can check out the course syllabus and take a free demo section of the class. Thanks for checking it out and hope to see you online or at a conference in the near future. Now, back to Blueprint. I definitely want to chase that thread on the how do we pick out the best resumes. But before we transition into that, one other question on the person trying to get in perspective. Literally like an hour ago, I was in the Blue Team Discord channel, and I get this question all the time. Someone's like, trying to get my first SOC job, trying to break into cyber. There's so many options and niches. How can I test out which one is going to be the best for me kind of at that stage? Like, do you have any advice on finding your niche as best you can without having done the job yet?
You don't know. I mean, that's the hard part is, get into the field and then slowly explore. You may not like the defensive aspect or the incident response aspect. I mean, some of it's just like, you start talking around to the lifestyle of an incident responder. Hey, I had, tickets to go see a concert on Friday night. Well, guess what? It's 4 p.m. on Friday. You get the call. You're not going to the concert that night. That's the lifestyle. And so then you're working 24 hours straight for the next, 2 to 3 days, and it changed, versus someone more on the defensive side, infrastructure, architecture. There's so many different fields in cybersecurity that, the best thing is get in one and then initially like take classes that give you a little bit of everything and then start to say, I really actually enjoyed this. And then you start to focus in on that. It's almost like, the same thing when you're in high school is like, what do you like doing? Do you like animals? Do you like, the concept of being, in the military? Do you like technology? Do you like debating? Do you like drama? And it kind of like, if you like this kind of thing, then there are fields out there that, more focused for you. And I just don't think we're to the point yet where we're doing personality assessments, which cybersecurity, animal are you? On Facebook or something like that. Maybe we should, but, most people is you get the right mentor or someone that's working with you and you'll kind of just find your path. And I hate to say it, just get in the field and find your way. There's no assessment out there that's going to tell you are you really going to like it or not. People initially will switch fields and then get into, I really like this one. And then you become, become in depth at that one. It's really hard to become a technologist of jack of all trades at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, that was kind of my advice to that person as well. As I said, like, in the beginning, a lot of it is just get that first job. And once you get in there, maybe you can do some job rotations. You can talk to your coworkers. I said, go to B-sides, talk to people in different organizations, whatever it is. Any InfoSec event you can get to where there's other people there. Talk to them and see what they like and dislike about their positions. And then, once you get that foot in the door, in my experience, and what a lot of people say is like, the second InfoSec job is way easier than the first one. It's that first one that's super difficult. But once you're on the inside, it'll be a lot easier to figure out what to do. And then, taking kind of broad training classes while you're there, SANS related wise, 401, 501, stuff like that would be probably outstanding for a reskilling kind of broad spectrum. Here's a whole bunch of stuff on a whole bunch of topics, and you might like any of this stuff, right? And it will prep you to do a whole bunch of useful things while you're at it. Those kind of experiences and anything like that where you're going real broad can definitely help. Back to the organization trying to hire and do that reskilling. So let's say you got 100 resumes on your desk. You mentioned some of the things that you'd be looking for, right? Interest and passion, and obviously a drive to learn and do this kind of thing. Are there any, I don't know if scientific is the word to put it, but more data-driven ways other than just kind of getting the feeling from talking to the person that you can use to try to identify the aptitude or likely potential for being awesome at cybersecurity from talking to those people, interviewing them, looking at resumes?
Yeah, actually, especially for entry level, and this is something, again, I've coached a lot of managers in technology fields in general about, because, and again, there's an overlap here between how you're going to get someone who's going to be willing to put the time in. You kind of could tell, initially is like, what do you do when you get home? And it's like, well, I never put my computer down. My spouse, partner, my dog looks at me like, are you playing or are you working? It's like, I don't know. There's this, I don't know. This may be playing. Researching something. I guess it's playing. I can't, I've been accused that. I'm sure you've been accused of that. It's like, oh, yeah. I honestly don't know if this is work or play. It's play. It's going to make you feel better. But let's assume they're not in technology in there, at all here. So usually I try to find something that someone has attempted to master that's, on their own. And again, this is a passion and willingness to learn, whether or not, hey, I, traveled over to Spain and, learned Spanish, or at least, I attempted to. Not great, but at least I was able to hang, and I met a, really nice person over there. We're still friends, and, we chat all the time, and I, speak Spanish. They make fun of me all the time because of it. Wait, you learned a foreign language. That's pretty hard, but you basically mastered the basics of that on your own. Yeah. What if they picked up golf or new sport? I interview questions I usually prompt someone with is, tell me a new skill that you've learned in the last 3 years that, you're not the best at, but, you would say in non-technical related that, he gave it a really good shot at. Someone might bring up golf. He's like, yeah, I'm not really good, but I could do double bogey golf at this point. I like it, but I'd like to get better. The fact that they stuck with it is what you're really looking for. You're really trying to avoid those who need life and the challenges of life to be equivalent to and easy to understand as a TiVo remote. Where you look at it and like, okay, I got to figure this out like in 3 seconds. You need someone to be able to say, okay, there's a point. It's the same thing that happens in exercise. And we talked about this a little bit in some of our previous groups, where the frustration builds and there's this kind of a nudge to say, you should stop. And then the person kind of ignores that and just presses on and says, well, I know it's a little bit difficult, but I'm just going to continue because it's kind of, why would I give up now? I'm out here. I'm playing golf. I'm on hole number 3. I'll just get, and, or the same thing of like learning a foreign language. There's this aspect of doing anything out there that is brand new that you need to force yourself through that initial, I'm going to quit at this point. And that's really what you're trying to look for in the interview. And you could even ask the following questions. Did you ever want to quit? Are you still doing it? And really trying to measure their aptitude for, picking up a challenge and forcing yourself to learn a new skill. Because if you find someone like that, you're never going to have to worry about them in your workplace. If there's a challenge in front of them, they're probably good to go self-teach themselves or get to a point where they're saying, hey, I know enough, but if you really need me to get good at this, I need to take a class. And that's really where, I've interviewed a lot of people that have ended up being extremely good on teams. And they've had no business of being in cybersecurity when you initially interviewed them. But you could just tell, you're just like, this person is either just, kind of like borderline crazy, or I'm just going to, they're just, I want this. I will, I'm going to dedicate myself to doing what is necessary to make this happen. Mm-hmm. And then they're usually, you don't have people put that kind of passion down and have them be wrong. That's where I was, okay, I'll take a risk on you, see what happens. But again, if you're looking for I need someone skilled and has all the checkboxes, you might be disappointed rather than just taking someone with just pure energy and passion and just putting them in an environment next to a mentor that puts them on a hill that says, hey, there's a technology learning curve here. It's sink or swim, but I'm here to help. Just today, I want you to look at HTTP traffic and understand the initial 4 sequences of a GET request. That's it. Master that, then we'll move to the next. It's those are the kind of people that you fall in love with.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. When I was doing a lot of hiring, that was always what I was looking for, is problem solving, the ability to push through very tough problems, and how they handled the tactics they used to get through that if they hit some kind of roadblock or whatever it was. And just the drive to do what you can do, right? From being an outsider in the industry. And when I was doing that myself, I made the jump from engineering into InfoSec. The things I was doing, I was going to DEF CON, I was trying to do projects, write a blog, whatever it was, right? Just so I had a little bit of extra head up on maybe someone that hadn't done those things, so I could show hey, I'm really into this. This is super interesting. Here's what I learned, whatever it is. That kind of stuff, I definitely think is a really good initial sign from someone who's going to be a candidate. If you were an organization, or maybe you've seen this before, whether you have or this is just a what would you do question, as an organization trying to bring people in maybe from their own employee pool and bring them into the SOC or the SecOps team or whatever, where would you, or how would you structure a program to kind of help people make that transition?
Oh, that's, what's another good question is, there's kind of 2 forms of this question is do you identify that folks, let's assume there's 2 forms of the individual, just brand new, hey, I'm working in, field X and I want to be moved over to cybersecurity. I would do an internal cybersecurity scholarship program and announce positions saying, we need people and we would love to have you transition over, and, make it an internal thing where it's an application process, just like an external job. But, just saying, we're looking for candidates who've been with the company for 3 or 4 years, willing to go through the scholarship program, willing to, and kind of make a big, deal about it, say, hey, upward momentum, X, Y, and Z. The other side to that is, what if you have existing, cybersecurity professionals on your team that you need to figure out, like, do they need to go through a retraining? Do they need additional skills? And this is, again, standard workforce mapping questions that so many people are so focused on the beginning of the funnel that they just assume that, and a lot of it's due to ego, is that you talk to the people out there they've been our problem solvers forever. I've never had to worry about, we call him the doctor because he's so good at what they do. Well, guess what? Lots of doctors really good at keeping their skills up to date. You need to go back to them and saying, hey, listen, if you're going to choose 3 different training classes that we could send you to right now that would really help you, what would those be? And they'll know better than you. That's, again, you could go to your, long-term employees who are the doctor, they're at the top of the food chain when it comes to technical knowledge, but I almost guarantee every single one of them will say, yeah, there's some stuff I would like to know, but they'll never fully admit it. I could brush up on some things, but again, let them choose, and they'll probably choose something that they, I'll say, really encourage you to choose something that out of these 3 is, because these are 3 problems. We have cloud, we have ransomware, we have, attacker techniques, and we need to make sure that, from your perspective, which one do you think would be most valuable for you? We were going to send you out, and plus, you could go recruit for us or do whatever, you do with these cons. But that's the type of individual. You don't forget about the mid and upper tiers, because right now there's a 10-year gap between, I guarantee, ask them when they went to their last training class and they say, well, I don't need, we need it for my team. They're almost like, a lot of them, the leaders will say, no, I eat last. I need my team to be skilled because I need them. I need to rely on them. And that's where you need to say, well, we also need you, the general, to maintain your hours in the fighter cockpit just as much as we have the lieutenant who's fresh out of fighter jet school to be flying those jets. I said, we need both of you. And that's where you need to take that time to really focus in on, connecting with those individuals and saying, it's probably time. You need to go back. There's some gap here that we're missing that we're going to need your leadership on. And getting that gap is going to help identify the gaps in your lower tiers, because they're going to immediately recognize, this is really hard. I need help here, and it can't just be me to worry about this. And that's where that gap filling is going to occur. And your workforce management really becomes your top of the top technical people that are going to help influence that the most. But they may not know what they don't know at this point. And that's where it's like, take that risk to sit down with them if you're like the management side to this and saying, you need to go to training 2 once a year. Which one?
Yeah. The knowing what you don't know or not knowing what you don't know problem is a big one. And really this whole discussion, especially with newcomers as well, is they're like, oh, should I focus on this tool, that tool, or whatever? So getting kind of guidance and mentors and anything that can help you kind of solve that, whether you're a manager or whether you're brand new to the field, is definitely a great way to try to focus your time and hit the right priorities. One of the things that reason I asked that previous question is, I was in a group where we were reskilling people from like the network operations team. We were bringing people in from the endpoint team and having them train up and work in the SOC, and it worked great, right? We brought in people from completely other jobs that had nothing to do with IT, and we had kind of a set of classes and things that we'd have them do and benchmarks we had to have them hit kind of as an expectation for jumping into the group. And doing a little bit of research before we did this episode here, I was kind of Googling around to see if I could see if other companies had like a structured program. And I noticed like Booz Allen is one. They have like a program, I can't remember what they called it, but they bring people in and there's like a cohort where they'll all kind of go through the same classes together. And there's certain benchmarks you have to hit to be successful before you even get in to the job. I didn't know if you had any thoughts on, doing it in that method versus individuals, or any other ways of how you would structure getting people kind of to that level, or testing whether they're ready.
Oh, great question. To be fair, I've not, seen one way work better than another. Assessments are very useful. The best assessment I've actually seen out there are those that, like the recertifications and something like that, especially it's hands-on, but, tabletop and seeing how the team reacts, to basic fundamental, here's this scenario, and usually have an outsider map it out, the scenario development more that you possibly do. But, in terms of do we identify multiple gaps where it gets in, multiple people through a single training class? Some of that stuff is just like staring at the current technology set right now and saying, am I losing sleep over this? That kind of gulp that occurs, when you end up looking at how fast things have transitioned over the past 3 years in your enterprises. I almost guarantee right now, you could throw a dart at the biggest Venn diagram and says, we need people in X. And usually right now it's, cloud is probably the biggest one, responding to cloud, defending the cloud, cloud analytics is, cloud, sensors integrated in the SOC, and host-based, it's like with their, remote workforce, a lot of people still working from home. And I don't think that's going to change is, do we have the right telemetry set up on these systems? And in addition to that, from a aspect of, from an organizational standpoint, are we doing the basic security awareness programs for individuals as well? And again, something like, having people focus in on just, are we doing security awareness properly for a workforce? When we have these incidents, it's usually attacking the human in one form or another. And, we could save a lot of money. And I always, tell organizations, like, the amount you put into your training, the risk is, you put in a technology, or you could pay out an insurance, or you could pay out the ransom. Say which one of these things might be cheaper. Again, it's a hedging your bets and putting, some money in all of them. But, what you look at the average cost of a single ransomware attack today is like, $500,000, $1 million, to a large organization. So that's, would you have hired a couple more people, top of the line, trained a couple more people, maybe, security awareness programs, look at that, it's like, how often does the cost risk assessment, when you're trying to, weigh, if we get hit, what is the actual cost going to be involved? And then of course your insurance rates and everything are going to go up because, X, Y, and Z, but it's the way world we live in. It's just like, should you potentially take your car and for regular maintenance before it breaks down, or, hey, can I afford the breakdown? It's, some people do it, just like, no matter what you say, I'm not changing my oil. I'll just go wait until the engine dies and I'll take it in and I'll get it fixed.
Yeah.
There's logic here, but then there's also sometimes just experience of having to have a breakdown to realize, maybe I should have done it a different way.
Yeah, that's another conversation I've had as an employee and as manager and as an instructor with a lot of students in class. Is always like, how do I figure out what the right amount of training is, and when to train, when not to train, and getting pushed back on like, oh, we don't want to train people and have them leave and all of that. To the point where in one of the slides in 551, I have the Richard Branson quote. I don't know if you've heard it, where he's like, train people well enough so that they can leave, and then treat them well so they don't want to. Right. And that's kind of my philosophy, is like, train people as much as you can, because everyone wins when you're doing that. People like their job. There's a lot of data out there that shows, people want to feel confident that they can do the job they're employed to do. Otherwise, that becomes, stressful in a bad way that can lead to burnout. If you're always responsible for something, you're like worried you're on the edge of competent for doing. And then, making sure that the workplace is a place that people actually want to stay. That's kind of the recipe for success in my book. And, looking at that, what I'm always trying to think about is, and asking guests is like, how do we measure this? And you've kind of already answered that in some ways, right? You talk about tabletops and all that. Are there any, I don't know if it's management metrics or other kind of like numeric things that you would look for as a sign that, I guess, either reskilling is working, or that you need reskilling, or that your team is kind of on the right path for just doing all of this well and creating a good environment and of well-trained individuals?
Yes. The first metric you look at is, what is your employee churn? And, how many of your employees are leaving? And is there a way we could get feedback on what needs to change to maintain them from not leaving? Is it a management issue? Is it upward mobility? Is it, maybe it's even a training thing? But, wherever you're at, it's the question, how fast can you run a mile? It doesn't really matter what that metric is. The question is, can we reduce it? Because of rehiring, retraining, and putting the person back into a position that's functioning takes months. And if you have consistent rotation, then you never will have a fully functioning team. So for some of this is like, organizations, well, we outsource a lot. We have a very small team for security people, but it's like, well, you lose one of them, And that could be a significant issue. So, going back to them says, well, our, churn rate is like near zero because they're all happy. I was like, but are they? Usually when you have a team of 3 people, guess what's going to happen? When one leaves, they all leave because they all like working together. So it's like, hey, I got a job. And by the way, you 2 are coming with me. And then all of a sudden, what do you do? So the question is, when you have a really small team in an organization, medium-sized business, then, definitely sit down at least once a year and just saying, you guys okay? Are y'all okay? Or, what do you need? What else? And some of it is just as simple as like, what I'd like? Free books. I tell that to a lot of managers that just go and here's what you do. Just go and offer that team free books. Well, buy as many books as you want. Buy book. And I know you're like, really, that's crazy. I'm like, honestly, what is the cost? Are they really going to be spending $5,000 in books annually? Probably not. But again, who cares if they are? It's $5,000. You're like, well, that's a lot of money, but maybe that is enough to say, hey, listen, I like keeping myself, on, by keeping on various technology things by doing books. Same thing on the training side. Just like, a lot of people in jobs see training as a benefit. And if you don't treat it as a benefit, just like PTO, people in technology fields hear about other workforces that have training as a benefit, and they will seek that. They see maintaining and skill relevance as something that is to be maintained. And it doesn't really matter. It's like, and that's kind of the benefit side. There's the organizational needs and there's a personal need. And you almost need to sit there and, say, how much do I let them just choose what they want to do? And maybe, it's like a one for you, one for me type deal. It's like, you want your course, you have to take mine first. It's like, I need someone who's really skilled cloud. Then you could go take your, training course wherever, but I have to choose the city. There's got to be a limit somewhere, but they're just work with them. But usually I said, even 2 training courses a year, it's like one for you, one for me, is going to be able to maintain. It's like, wow, you will get a lot of people like, pass up on 30K, plus job salary increases just because they like their training benefit. It's because they know they would always be able to leave and get that, but they like maintaining their congruence and ability to maintain their skill sets. But again, the biggest thing, metric, going back to your original question, is like, just look, if you're a large organization, what's your churn rate? And at the different levels too, entry, mid, top tier.
Yeah, I agree. Turnover is probably one of the biggest indicators of health of the team. That seems like it's universally, whether it's security or not, right? If people are constantly leaving, not a good sign. We're getting close to our end here. Any kind of final resources or other kind of things you'd like to point out that we can put in the show notes, or any other kind of final thoughts to close it up?
Well, it goes back to what I was saying before is, my theory, and I'm starting to see this, is that, really take a look at, your cybersecurity workforce in general. And especially with what, the transition that happened during COVID and the rapid, IT is one thing, but the IT security folks are completely different. They've been playing catch up for nearly 2 to 3 years now on this massive transition from, everyone in a single office location connected by VPNs into everyone's working from home. And it completely transitioned that attack surface. You should have a really serious conversation about, do we have the adequate skills, even for our senior most people, to defend and respond to incidents on our network? Then on the second side is those folks who are brand new, figure out a way to get them in the door. And like I said before, is, saying, hey, we train, is one of those things. It's just, you can't beat that. You're going to have a lot of people apply and say, we will train you, come on board with us. And we're going to mentor, we're going to train, show them the environment, and say, hey, every time we get a new group of 5 people, we're going to send you a training course. You'll go through the same training course, then you'll work together as a team. I mean, there are different ways to approach it. But having HR kind of, last around this 3 years experience, comp sign minimum, you're not going to find them. Those people are already mid-tier folks. 2 to 3 years in, you're already probably a mid-level analyst. It's like you're really trying to get them through that initial 1 year period and then have them stick with the team. But I recommend a lot of organizations take the risk on retraining, especially early on, and get as many resumes in the door as possible, and just choose the best, and just cultivate the culture, create the culture at that level to where they want to stay. And even if they do leave, you'll have some leave. That's the metric. Is like, can we get that metric higher? What additional changes can we have to be able to move them from a new to a mid-level security analyst on our team, to where they'll stay with their team like 4 or 5 years? And that's kind of the other thing you got to look at, is what is the real expectation you'll have someone for their entire career? It's 0, folks, 0. you need to assume if you get someone for 4 or 5 years, you did good. If you get off of the mindset that it's going to be like, I'm going to get someone for 15 years, like unlikely. Think 4 or 5 for those in their 20s right now. And then if you're able to accomplish that, you did good. And then you just may have to hire in someone from the 5-year period. You're obviously taking from someone else too. But there's this inherent need, the data does not lie, that most people in their 20s and early 30s are a 4 or 5 year max window per job that they're employed in. Just LinkedIn that. You'll see it all over the place.
Yep. All right. Well, I think that wraps it up. Thanks for all that. Awesome discussion. Had a good time. A lot of good wisdom in there for those looking to either reskill yourself or for those in your organization. So thank you, Rob, for joining us on Blueprint today. I appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, John. Appreciate it.